Hey everyone, this is Zach with 8020 Media, here today with a video on signs and symptoms of a failing transmission. Transmission problems are something that most people probably don't want to think about or suspect that they have problems with, because a transmission can unfortunately be a very expensive and complicated repair, even for experienced mechanics and technicians. So not the most fun problem and symptoms to think about. However, understanding the symptoms of a failing transmission can be very important and helpful in detecting transmission problems as soon as possible to avoid more expensive repair bills if you do end up running into mechanical problems or more severe mechanical issues. That's especially true if the ultimate cause of the failing transmission or the symptoms of a failing transmission come down to something like low transmission fluid or old and dirty transmission fluid. Noticing that as soon as possible and simply topping up the transmission fluid or actually changing the transmission fluid can save you from potentially running into serious mechanical problems with the transmission if that fluid is allowed to stay too dirty or too low for an extended period and then lead to mechanical problems with the transmission itself. With that said, let's go ahead and jump right into some of the most common signs and symptoms of a failing transmission. At number one on the list here, we have the transmission being stuck in gear or not shifting gears. So there are a lot of different ways that this can look like, and the exact thing that's going on depends on your specific transmission problems and the potential failure or mechanical issue at hand. Maybe your transmission isn't engaging in reverse, maybe it's not engaging drive, or maybe it's going through reverse neutral drive just fine, and maybe even gears 1, 2, and 3 are working fine, but for whatever reason it won't shift into fourth gear, or it's getting stuck in fourth gear and won't shift to any gears higher than that. So again, a lot of different things this can look like, and it really just depends on the vehicle in question and the specific transmission problem. But in any case, if you are having problems getting stuck in gear or the transmission is just having issues shifting gears, then those are all signs that you can very well have a transmission problem, low transmission fluid, or something actually mechanically wrong inside of the transmission. Symptom number 2 of a failing transmission are slipping gears. Like the issue with the transmission getting stuck in gear or not shifting gears, slipping gears, there are a few different things that this can look like, and that applies to a lot of the symptoms that we discuss with transmission problems. However, when you have slipping gears, this could look like something when the transmission does shift gears, the RPMs may kind of jump artificially high, may jump a lot higher than they should be at for that shift. And where you should be for your given speed and gear that you're in. Another thing that can often happen is when the transmission is actually in gear, you might notice again that those RPMs are artificially high. Maybe the engine should be at 2,000 RPMs in second gear at 20 miles an hour, for example, but you notice that the engine is really revving to 3,500 RPMs. So that is essentially what slipping gears looks like. Ultimately, the main cause of this is when you're shifting gears, it may just be a little delay or it's slipping in between gears. Or if you're in a certain gear, it's just not fully catching that gear, and that's ultimately why those RPMs are ending up artificially high. Symptom number 3 of a failing transmission is clunking or jerking, especially while shifting gears. So maybe when you upshift or downshift, you notice that the transmission and the vehicle in general just feel like they're clunking and really jerking back and forth in the vehicle as the transmission is shifting gears. Both signs that you very well may have a problem with the transmission. For symptom number 4, this is kind of general and ties into a few of the other symptoms of transmission failure that we already discussed. But at number 4, we have the transmission just feeling hesitant, unresponsive, and sluggish. Ultimately, a lot of this ties into the transmission just not catching gears properly. And so that's why you can feel certain things like just a hesitant transmission, or it feels sluggish or unresponsive. Again, using the slipping gears as we talked about, the gears aren't fully catching, and that's why the RPMs are jumping up artificially high. And so basically the transmission just isn't properly catching all of that power and torque and actually sending it to the drive wheels of the vehicle. And so that's why you can start to feel just some of that hesitation, sluggishness, unresponsiveness. Your acceleration might feel a little bit slow. Those are all signs that you may be having issues with your transmission. Moving on to symptom number 5 of a failing transmission, we have weird sounds, and there are really a number of different sounds that a failing transmission can make. It may be clunking, grinding, or whining noises, among a few other possibilities. Of course, these are all noises that can come from a lot of different engine accessories, a lot of different engine components and vehicle components. So if this is your only symptom, it doesn't mean it's a transmission. In fact, if these weird sounds are your only symptom, it's very unlikely to be the transmission itself. But when the transmission is experiencing issues, it's not uncommon to hear some weird sounds and weird noises associated with that. So if you're noticing some of the other symptoms that we've discussed, like a slipping transmission or slipping gears, the transmission getting stuck in gear, not shifting, and that is accompanied by weird sounds like clunking, grinding, whining, that's a likely indication that you do have a transmission problem at hand. And those sounds are probably coming from the transmission itself. So sounds like clunking and grinding are typically due to metal on metal contact. And so that could just be low transmission fluid or old dirty transmission fluid. Or again, it might point to an actual mechanical issue within the transmission. Moving on to symptom number 6, we have burning smells coming from a failing transmission. Ultimately, these burning smells typically boil down to a transmission that is overheating and getting too hot. A couple common causes of that are low fluid, old or dirty fluid, as well as a worn clutch or issues with the torque converter, among a couple other potential mechanical issues that could cause that. But ultimately, if your transmission is overheating, that often leads to burning smells. And when accompanied by other symptoms, that is again a likely indication that you are having problems with the transmission in your vehicle. That wraps up the most common symptoms and signs of a failing transmission. So as I kind of touched on at the start of the video, unfortunately transmission problems can be very complex. They're complicated issues that even some experienced mechanics and shops have issues with, especially if they're not experienced with transmissions. So a lot of the times this can be an issue that really should be diagnosed and left to the people who actually work on transmissions and understand all of the mechanical details and inner workings of a transmission. There are a lot of moving parts within a transmission, and that's really what makes this such an expensive and complicated repair, and something that even some experienced repair shops won't touch. But ultimately, there are a couple things that you can do at home, just about anyone, even without any mechanical knowledge, to just double check and see if you do have transmission problems. A lot of modern cars will trigger a light if you do have low transmission fluid. The car may also store some fault codes or engine codes in the ECU or PCM, the powertrain control module essentially. And so using something simple like an OBD2 scanner, you can plug that into the OBD2 port, scan the vehicle for any stored codes, and that may point you in a certain direction when it comes to transmission problems. Otherwise, start with the basics. If you're past due on any transmission service, like a transmission fluid change, then it might be getting old and dirty, or you might have just lost some fluid. It might be a little low on fluid. Ultimately, that can be a major cause of transmission problems and a lot of the symptoms that we just discussed. However, if you do have a mechanical issue, something going on internally in the transmission, that's typically best left to the professionals unless you are a highly experienced mechanic and someone who really understands the inner working of transmissions. Anyway, guys, that wraps up our video for today. If you appreciated the content, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out the description below for more awesome content. Thanks, guys.